All right. Cool, man. Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah, so
Yeah. Welcome to a Campfire Music Foundation interview. So these are interviews that we do with artists, kind of get a sense of what it's like to be a working musician. And yeah, and just kind of check in on where you'd like to see the industry change in order to better serve it. But I'm just curious. So how did you start playing bass? Were you were you originally a percussionist?
well, it's kind of it's a story of that story. Just, I mean, I had when I was a little kid, I kind of started becoming a record collector, and so that was like the beginning of it. But the real beginning of it is tropical fish. I used to keep like guppies and like actual fish. And I was coming home one day from the fish store and I had a bunch of fish in a bag. And the person who lived in the next apartment to me was kind of like, "Hey, you keep fish?" And I was like, "Yeah." So I went in his apartment and he had seemed like 20 fish tanks in there. And so I was totally fascinated by this. And he convinced my brother and I to help him with his fish business. But it turned out that the fish business was actually sort of his side hustle, because he's actually a percussionist. And we started talking about music and stuff, and eventually he gave me a conga, and that's what I started playing. And I played conga for a while, I got pretty decent at it, but I actually really wanted to play bass. So I said to him, I said, I like conga and everything, but I really...
Why do you want to play bass?
Because I like I liked, how it funked. I listened to a lot of funk music and reggae and stuff so I love that. In those kinds of music, the bass is really the main instrument. And so that was that. And I also say probably subconsciously, I was drawn to it because my parents were deaf. Well, my mother was totally deaf. My father wore a hearing aid. But they were actually excellent dancers. There's a lot of deaf people who dance very well, and they dance to the vibe, to the vibration.
Because they can feel the love for
Jesus. Yeah, love for Jesus. So I think, subconsciously that was a big one as well. So I went to them, I said, "Hey, this congas are cool and everything, but I either really want to play bass or be a DJ." Mm-hmm. And the context of this is that was before DJing was then. It was just starting off. And he was kind of like, "Yeah, I don't know, this DJ thing is a fad and should be a bass player." So I became a bass player. So note one is your mentors aren't always, futurists.
Sure.
But then I picked it up and I had a knack for it, so I stuck with it. And I was kind of like, okay, I'm actually good at this, so I get going.
Do you get to DJ nowadays at all?
Well, I mean, I always kept up with making electronic music. Mm-hmm. When drum machines came out, I learned how to work them. There was an instrument called the Fairlight, which was the first really great sort of digital workstation. It was really expensive, like $500,000. And there were two at that time. There was the Fairlight and the Synclavier. So I learned how to work the Fairlight. So I always been keeping up with electronic music.
What was the other one? The Fairlight
and the Synclavier. Those were the two main ones that people made records with back in before times. So I don't
digital audio workstations.
Those were the two. Those
weren't the two over here.
Like $100 each.
Okay.
Sure. And eventually now you can have one in your phone. So the progression. When in the 90s I was making hip hop beats and stuff. So I've always kept along, and now I put out an electronic record. I guess that was 2 years ago. I put out an electronic music record. So I finally established myself as that's what I do as well. So I did both. But as far as DJing, I'm going to probably buy a DJ rig
to do it live.
Yeah, I use Ableton. I have an Ableton Push.
Yeah.
So I use that. But I actually
want to spin and
just to see what it feels like, with the digital crack.
Yeah.
But I've been doing, but as far as doing electronic adding electronics to music. I've been doing that for a while now.
So outside of DJ music, what kind of put you on to electronic music and making electronic music? Like, was it?
Well, I used to hang out, I used to go clubbing. I mean, at this point, it's just one of my things now. I'm looking to don't want to be the old guy in the club, but I always loved club music, you know what I mean? And in the early days of hip hop, there wasn't really this big split. It was all club music. Hip hop was club music, so it wasn't the same split, everything wasn't so defined between the genres as it was now. So there wasn't this wall up. A lot of the, there wasn't this wall up between like what you did with the sampler. It's like the wall was did you use a sampler or not, and that was the big wall for me to climb. Because as somebody who learned how to play an instrument, I was very much a anti-sampling snob for a long time, and that went by the wayside. Actually,
I'm a drummer, so I feel that way about. I still feel that way about like electronic drums to a degree. Yeah,
they're a different tool, you know what I mean. And making music electronically has its own thing. I mean, if anything, what's happened in the last year is I bought an instrument called the Dusun, which is a traditional African instrument, because I wanted to have something that was totally acoustic, that didn't depend on if the electricity went out. You know what I mean? So I wanted to get the exact opposite of the purely music in a box, something like purely acoustic.
So do you play upright at all?
I did for a while, and decided that wasn't really for me.
Yeah.
So I mean, I was already, like I said, the drum machines had already happened, and I was already learning how to do that. And I was kind of like, well, I either have time to get really great on this, or I can learn how to do this thing. And it looked like that thing was more important, and I stand by that at this point.
Yeah. So it was very much, music was always very electronic to you. It's always something plugged in.
Well, no, I mean, like I said, I came up doing funk and reggae, so to the extent that that's a whole different bass sound than acoustic bass sound. I mean, for a while I had what they call a baby bass, which is the bass they play in Latin music, which is it's an electric bass, but kind of looks like a very small acoustic bass.
Yeah.
And I had one of those when I was doing Latin sessions. But I mean, it's big, it's unwieldy. And when I started playing with a lot of the older jazz musicians, guys like Lonnie Smith. I stayed a lot with Lonnie Smith, the organ player. And the jazz guys would call me to come play electric bass. So I'm kind of like, well, if this is what, there's already guys doing acoustic. This is what they want, so this is what I'm doing. So that's where that landed.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what it meant. Like, you were someone who has played rock, has played jazz, and have kind of saw that. Did you kind of see the transition of jazz from a acoustic tradition to really that's predominantly more and more so nowadays an electronic tradition?
Well, I mean, the person who taught me how to play is one of the greatest. Well, let me not overstate it. One of the people who started me off on the bass is one of the greatest acoustic bass players who lives, a man named Reggie Workman, who played with Coltrane. He played with Art Blakey. And what happened at that time, a bunch of the jazz musicians in Brooklyn wanted to make sure that the music got passed on to the next generation. So they set up this thing where you come Saturday morning and you could get lessons. So between Reggie Workman and Miss Lucy, who taught electric bass there, they were a big part of why I started playing, and they're a big part of everybody of my generation, whether they play rock or R&B or whatever. Everybody's who's of my era who came up in Brooklyn at that time were all based jazz musicians, because that's the foundation for everything. And as far as the transition, I would say I didn't really think of it. It's more of a generational thing, because we were playing electric instruments and they were playing acoustic instruments. And as I said, that was the time when a all the cats were grappling with what they were going to do with popular music, because you got to remember, even, in the 50s, they were playing pop songs, like If I Were a Bell, Body and Soul. These are all the pop songs of that time. Now you get to the time when we were coming up, the question becomes how the jazz guys interfacing with pop music. And at that time, they were going to interface, they had to have electric instruments. So that's kind of how I looked at it. I didn't look at it as this sort of transition as much as more an addition, because they were still doing their thing. And it was a very strong, when I came up, it was a very strong kind of like revolutionary slant to the music, very Afrocentric. So it was kind of a separate thing that wasn't, didn't think of it in terms of a transition or in terms of a day, because, thinking of people like Farrah Sanders, who, people still, feel like what he's doing is current now, or even, on a more extreme side, somebody like Sun Ra, who, the music he made 50 years ago is still valid today. So those are the kind of people like the jazz that I came up listening to, is that jazz that's kind of hasn't lost its validity and for whatever reason.
Kind of on that note, what was it like playing with Sonny Sharrock? And
that was great. That was amazing. At that time I was playing with a man named Ronald Shannon Jackson, who had played drums with Ornette Coleman. And we used to rehearse in this club in the Upper West Side of New York City. That a lot of the shows of more avant music would be get presented at that space. Mm-hmm. So I was in that space all the time. So I saw that Sonny was playing, and I went, and I was kind of like, I just went to go. And we went, and it was a 2-set show.
How old were you?
21, 22, probably around in there. Mm-hmm. I guess that was, 20.
Okay.
All right. So we went, and this was right when Sonny had started making his comeback. So we went, and the place was maybe like half full, and they played amazing. I went and introduced myself to him and the band, and the audience started kind of like filing out. And we were talking, and by the time we finished talking, there was nobody. I was like glad the audience had left, right? And I was like, okay, guys, I'll see y'all later. And the son was like, where you going? I was like, I'm here now. And he said, we're playing another set. So I literally had my own private Sonny Sharrock concert. That was the first time I heard him play it. And, like that, all out. And then basically I just followed him around because that's New York City, and whoever's playing bass, I knew eventually there was something else was going to come with that bass player. So he would have to, so I just kind of was like, well, let me just make sure that he knows I'm the first person he should call. So I just hung around and, took 3 or 4 gigs. And then the other bass player had something else to do, and then I was in. So.
Wow.
And,
how many records did you do?
I did 2 records with Sonny.
Okay.
Sees the Rainbow and Live in New York. And I was in the band 5 years, and we had 1 rehearsal all time. And the recording session was my favorite recording session of all the recording sessions I've done, because it was the shortest. The Caesar Rainbow album, I showed up at the recording studio at 7 p.m. and I left the recording studio at 10 p.m. Now, I don't know if anybody, if you're not a musician, there's no context for this, but a lot of times it takes months for people to make records. Even a jazz record, you might spend, 2 or 3 days, which is considered making a jazz record in 3 days. That's considered long for a jazz record, but it's actually really short
for the whole production.
Yeah, but to do the whole record in like 2 or 3 hours is like, that's a whole nother, that's, people don't do that anymore. So that was very memorable for me.
Did you even stop playing, or did you just like show up, play the song?
Well, what happened was we were doing the first song, and that was the first time I had seen what they call private cue, which is when you're listening to music in the studio, you listen in headphones because everything's separated. So you can't hear everything. So you have the headphones on, and there's a box that all the different instruments are on that you got to adjust. So the first song, I was listening and adjusting, literally like playing and turning the knobs on this thing at the same time. And at the end of the first song, Sonny was like, okay, that's great. On to the next song.
So the version that's on the record is you just figuring out your ear.
Yeah, I was figuring out the headphones while the song was going on. So I was going like, oh, it's like that tonight. So we just kept going. So
big story.
Yeah. And that was at, but then part of it was at Electric Lady Studios where Hendrix used to record. So that studio also had such a vibe that it was one of the places. It's like magical. You could do stuff from there.
Mm-hmm. Who's all on that record?
It was just a quartet on that record. It was Sonny, the leader, drummer named Farhan Atlaf, great jazz drummer, and drummer named Abe Speller, another great drummer who's done all kinds of stuff. So it was just the four of us on that record. And Bill Laszlo produced it, and I think he actually overdubbed bass on one song after I left it.
Okay. Fascinating. So kind of like to switch gears, when it comes to making art, how have you approached the money-making side of it? Not that there's a whole lot of money to be made as a working artist for anyone, but...
Well, I mean, that's the funny thing. A lot of my mentors were successful musicians, and they kind of hammered into us the idea that you should be successful. And so that was always something that I thought about early on and thought about how to make it happen. I mean, things are different. I mean, a lot has happened, so it's really a generational thing, I think, in terms of, once, for those who weren't around, you have the whole national thing where the music business fell apart, and then you have this kind of reconstruction. But what's happened in the culture in general with social media is that people have gotten used to giving away their creativity, and they don't see it as valuable. And that has affected everything. And on so many different levels, even in terms of, everybody's, how can I put this? These fortunes have been built on the backs of human creativity, and they managed to turn human creativity into sort of like it's coal or oil or something that's just in the ground that they can just grab. And that's going to have, now that we hit just the AI era, and that's really going to be even more problematic for regular people, because they sold it as this thing, oh yeah, you can have coins and then free to do what you want. But it's not, people don't participate in any of the value they create. My thinking back in the beginning is that, Facebook should have been paying people, not people. People thought of it as they were getting something. No, they were building value for this corporation. And now that we're in a situation where these corporations are worth billions and they can literally affect elections, people have no say over anything that happens. So it's an interesting conundrum that people are going to have to deal with now, just this idea of what is creativity worth. And, I don't actually, it's interesting. I was watching this series of videos about hyperpop, and it was really interesting to me because in certain ways, it reminded me of when I was coming up. A bunch of my friends were really great graffiti artists. And the thing the commonality is not the art, but the commonality is that a lot of the people in the hyper pop scene were really young when they started doing stuff. They were teenagers. And for me, the thing that stuck about that is that this generation of teens, the hyperpop generation of teens, they created this stuff thinking like teenagers. So they didn't think about, okay, how is this going to get paid for? They weren't even thinking about how am I going to eat because somebody was feeding them. They're not thinking about any of these sort of capitalist structures. They kind of just saw this thing as, okay, I have this venue I can use, but they didn't think about how is SoundCloud operating? Why is it I'm not getting paid? It's just like, so then now they hit their 20s and now they got to start paying bills. And it's kind of like, what do we do? And then what happens is Spotify gets involved and Spotify makes this hyperpop playlist. And that playlist now determines their careers. It has nothing, so they had no say on a certain level. You know, it's like all the say went to Spotify. And what becomes successful with hyperpop is purely based on what gets on a Spotify playlist. And just watching watching these videos about this, and it's, in a nutshell, it's all the problems of the music business today. But they all stem back to people not understanding that their creativity is valuable, you know? Because if they understood it was valuable in the beginning, they wouldn't have put themselves in a position where some outsider could determine the value of it, or some outsider could dictate what was going to be successful about what they're doing. And, you know, it goes when I used to, you know, at one point I was head of arts rights group. And one of the things I used to do in presentations was talk about the fact that hip hop as a form couldn't exist. If hip hop was born today, it wouldn't be able to exist, because the whole thing of hip hop, not the whole thing, but one of the reason hip hop was able to sustain itself was because there was money floating around. These days, all the money's flowing to Stockholm. It's not flowing to whatever community that created the music. Whereas, you know, the days of mixtapes, the days of DJs, there was money floating around that would allow the community to sustain itself. So that's a big problem overall. You know, in the digital era, the monopolizing of the income and creativity is a real issue that this generation is going to have to grapple with. And I also, you know, the risk of going on and on, but I think the important thing for people who weren't there is to really remember how it started. The whole thing got sold as some kind of egalitarian thing, was going to make things better. There was the guy who was I can't remember his name now, who was the lyricist for the Grateful Dead. And there was this whole group of people that had this real sort of utopian, egalitarian view of what the internet could do. And, you know, in this view, copyright was a bad thing. Everything should be shared. But what ended up happening was the structures of sharing got taken over by a very small group of people who make a whole bunch of money off of it.
Yeah, they saw people stealing from artists, and they said, hey, that's our job.
That's our job. And it's also a question of people not really thinking about the internet the internet was literally designed as a command and control mechanism. That's the whole point of it. So people didn't really think about the implications of how that would impact things as it grew. How
that could turn into extremely powerful structures that dictate our media, our culture, the way we create art and share media.
And now kind of here we are at this kind of weird inflection point where we have to talk about, well, can you make, it's always been, can you make money as an artist? I'm not going to try to pretend that isn't the case. But the difference now is you have these monopoly structures that dictate what art should be. It's got to be, the labels have gone to a whole thing of it's got to be viral. It's got to fit into this small mechanism that doesn't really work for art. I mean, it's kind of like, okay, so something went viral. And that's now the criteria of what is going to determine your musical success. But in the meantime, there's no, as humans, I guess you can manufacture. People have been trying to manufacture virality the whole time, and not that many people have been good at it. But the thing becomes, okay, you got some person who went viral because of something they did, but it's not, they're good at being viral. That doesn't mean they're good at doing music. So you have a lot of people who just really, you see these people who went viral and their shows are terrible. Their careers end up being very short because of the nature of virality is like, okay, that was cool. Okay, on to the next thing. But they also end up being short because the people have not prepared themselves as artists. So when they get on stage, it's terrible and everybody knows it's terrible. So no one's going to go see them after 2 or 3 shows. That's it. So you have this kind of weird conglomeration of issues that is really impacting what the current state of music, current state of arts in general. I mean, it's going to be the same thing for visual artists, same thing for artists. It's going to have to be worked out.
So what was it like when you were first starting your career? I assume what were your main income sources? It's like live music, and then did you make anything for records?
Well, that's what I'm saying. And I want to try to oversell the old days as something was better. Yeah. I mean, one of my first learning experiences, this was like the first band I was ever in was kind of this funk band in the neighborhood of Brooklyn. And there was a person who was then a very, one of the more popular producers of the time came and heard the band, and he really liked one song in particular that I had written with the drummer. And he said,
Power Tools? Okay.
No, this is way before. This is before anybody knew what it was. This was still in the neighborhood, like the local funk band, still just random Brooklyn funk band. And this producer came in. I don't want to name who he is because it's, whatever. But we had quite a few big records. And he comes in and he's kind of like, yeah, that one song, you guys, I really like that song. I want to buy that song from you. And I said to him, and that's great. I mean, it's going to be great to see my name on a record. And he said, you didn't hear me. I said, I want to buy the song from you, and we turned it down. I don't know if I'd make a different decision there, but I'm saying early on, started grappling with what the music business actually is, and for me, that time, we wanted to, coming up with the jazz guys, the jazz is really egalitarian in music and everybody knows who everybody is, and to go be trained with guys like that. And like, I'm talking to this guy and it's kind of like, he's just going to buy my song and then no one's going to, I couldn't wrap my head around it. But then you come to find out how the music business actually operates, and if anything goes writing is happening more than and you have situations where now with sampling, there's like 20 people on a song, and then 20 people have, and then those 20 people, they gotta have to split it. It isn't, so.
What did, like your mentors, like playing with older cats at such a young age, having that made you think about the value of music?
Well, one of my dearest friends is a man named Gary Fritz, who is important for various reasons. But the reasons he's important to this story is his uncle is Ralph McDonald, who co-wrote Just the Two of Us. He co-wrote Where Is the Love? Just the Two of Us is Bill Withers. Where Is the Love is Donny Hathaway and Roberta Flack. He wrote Mr. Magic, which is the classic kind of like jazz funk song. I can go, if just those three.
Just those three, right. Using a sense of,
Yeah, so the idea that, understanding how the music, and his partner, Ben and Bill Salto's no longer with us, especially talking, not so much with Ralph, but talking with Bill about how the music business actually runs. And, reading articles. I remember reading an article about bass player Michael Henderson, who was one of my favorite bass players. It was one of Miles Davis' bass players. And he's talking about, we're back. All right. Anyway, to jump back in. And the point being that I was taught from the beginning that playing an instrument was important, but publishing was actually where the money was.
I think so. And retaining publishing people.
And retaining publishing. Owning it, and when and where to deal with the control of publishing. Because, sometimes you might sell a piece. You might, me personally, I gave you a story from my own life where I decided I wasn't going to sell any, but
you said maybe you would make, it's like there's different sides to it.
There's different sides to it. Yeah. And also at the time when I came up, there was still a very strong studio scene. So the idea was if you could play an instrument well, you could make a living playing music. And a bunch of my contemporaries became very successful as studio musicians.
Just getting paid for the studio theater. Yeah.
J.T. Lewis, who's in Harriet Tubman, for example, he's probably played on a few thousand, maybe not a few thousand, but I would say 1,000 recording sessions. Of many from like Whitney Houston to Tina Turner. So that idea that if you actually were good at your instrument, again, it goes back to the jazz training. If you could play your instrument well, you could make a living at it. But for me, I knew early on that I didn't really have. I'm much more gregarious now than I was when I was a kid, but I was kind of emo, If they had emo back then, so I wasn't the kind of person who was going to go in a room and laugh the room and people would be like, hey, we need to do this. So I knew that I really had to learn how to differentiate myself, and what I figured out was learning how to write would be a thing that would be differentiated for me. So I spent a lot of time developing that skill. And, by the time, go through a few different iterations of things that don't work, but then by the time I hit the Rollins band, and, that became necessary part of rock music, which is another thing that, drew me to rock music in the beginning, just on the practical business side, because you look at taking away the jazz side of things, you look at the popular music side of things, you look at the R&B community, then and now, it was the people who make the records and the people who perform are two different sets of people. Whereas if you're in a rock band, it's the same set of people. And so that was always attractive to me from the beginning. So I knew being in a band and being part of this contained unit that could move around. Of course, after you're doing it a while, and you're kind of like, hey, I wish I could contain it. Start getting into production where it's a different thing, where you get to be around, you get to have this really intense relationship for a while, and then you can let the thing go. So I can get into that aspect too. But yeah, to your main point, it's like a lot of the people who ended up being mentors for me really stressed the idea that you should be making a living at this, and they kind of directed us as to how. And that's actually contrary, which, even thinking back to the beginnings of the indie scene, where it kind of became a thing of, people, there's nothing wrong with having a day job, but that's a different thing than the idea that you should make a living at your music. As opposed to, okay, I have a day job to support my music. as opposed to I have a day job as an assistant so that the music will support me. And to me, it's two different things. Yeah.
Probably. So what your music advocacy work, how do you see yourself or your music as a vehicle for advocacy or change, or do you see it that way at all?
Well, I think it's, I mean, I see it as a vehicle for change. I mean, it changes, again, you have to be reflective about this, and I'm not in my 20s anymore, so it becomes a question of how does what I do now contribute to the conversation? And I think, a lifetime of training as a jazz musician, a lifetime in being in these more kind of cutting edge communities, and a lifetime of being with music that's got a community focus, which is really free jazz. It's really, at the end of the day, that's what's important about it. I think that part of it is creative, that thinking about music a certain way is part of what I bring to the table. And I also think it's structural in terms of, okay, what do these structures look like that can make music viable for people and for the creators as well. So I'm not doing so much direct advocacy, but I think it's more a question of indirect advocacy in terms of setting up situations that allow people to flourish that aren't, it's not such an overt thing where I'm like out there with, in front of Google like we used to be. But I think it's more kind of like, okay, how can I make sure that I set up a situation where some money has to flow into the situation and people who get involved with me, they can walk away with some money. That's kind of always been part of it. I mean, even back when I first started, I would always make sure, didn't matter if the person was like, okay, it was their first gig, or if I always made sure that they got paid good. And to me, that's a part of it. So figuring out how to do that in 2025, that becomes a question, because things that, the pay for a musician hasn't gone up in 20 literally. So it becomes a question. And again, it's the issues I talked about earlier about as far as how digital technology has affected the flow of money. That becomes another issue.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and I think...
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask about the Black Rock Coalition and how advocacy ties into that.
Well, that was the whole point of that organization. It's kind of like, and I mean, it's hard to think about it now. Maybe it's not that hard to think about it, but I mean, they weren't even that when the organization started. They weren't even playing Michael Jackson videos on MTV. I mean, CBS had to threaten to pull all of their videos to make them play Michael Jackson videos. And you think about I don't know if he still is, but that's the best Thriller is the best selling record of all time for a long time. And they couldn't even get the videos on there. So that's the level we were talking about as far as that. And in terms of making a way for people to even be heard making the music. And I mean, I think we're going to end up coming back to that. There's going to be there's going to be a following, and there's going to have to be some, people are going to have to actually make some noise to make things change. Things aren't going to change by themselves. But to the question, yes, the whole point of the Black Rock Coalition was the very simple idea that, Black people created rock and roll. I'm actually writing a book called The Science of Black Music, and it's not an exaggeration to say that Black people, at minimum, I mean, this conservative way of saying it is that we are intimately involved in every music that was created in America. Black people were involved. The unfiltered version of it is that we created all of it.
And that the American industry was built off of exploiting Black labor.
Yeah. And, on multiple levels, but talking specifically about music, we'll leave the rest of it out. Talking specifically, none of this music would exist without Black people. So you get to the 80s where you got music television and there's no Black people. Okay, there's the one show that happens and then it's a very specific thing. But to have something that shows the totality of Black creativity, that was kind of the point. And what came out of it is, one of the biggest rock bands that ever came out of New York City, was, so it was a question of merit. It wasn't a question of, we didn't want to hand out. We had the best fucking bands. And once we got let in, that became obvious. So so that was really the point of the organization. And
did you feel what sort of pushback did you feel from music industry, from critics? What was the fight like against that?
Well, the fight is inertia. The fight is, because you have these things, hip hop had just broken through then when we started the organization. So now you have this thing like people didn't want to let through, that they let through. But now this thing is exploding. So now, okay, all Black music, everybody's like, okay, this is Black music, or this is popular music. So you have these, like the same way now, you have this inertia around virality. It's like they're not going to, if it's not viral, it's not going to get through. So what you're doing is you're fighting against people's opinions about what they think music should be, regardless of the actual reality. Because we were, we wouldn't do gigs, and the gigs would be packed. The audiences were obviously responding to what we're doing. But it took 3-4 years for them to sign Living Color for when it started. And it took like 2 or 3 different rounds, and it actually finally took Mick Jagger to come in and say, okay, you guys are good. And that's what made everybody else move. But if he hadn't stepped in, who knows? So it's this question of, most people line up thing and they set up this wall, and the question is how you knock the wall down. And you knock the wall down by doing what Black Rock Flows you do. You put the community together, and the community has to support the thing. And if you're lucky, the thing will break through. But if you don't have a community supporting the thing, all you have is the hyper-pop situation where the corporation's going to totally dictate what, you could make an argument of the fact that, as Black people, there was, we didn't even really have the expectation. And put it another way, the fact that we weren't going to get through was a given. So we had to build our own structure that could make what we wanted to do happen. And
you keep actual economic value within the community. Yeah,
to make sure, exactly, to keep the economic value. Whereas now you have a situation where, I don't know. It's something I think about a lot. Like, if I was starting off now, what would I be doing? And it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't, it's a whole, the whole idea. I always tell people, like, songs were our Bitcoin. You could take this thing, you could literally create value out of thin air with a song. But now everything has been co-opted, and it's not that a song isn't worth anything, but it's much harder for a creator to get the worth of a song now than it was then. It just is. And I'm not saying that in some sort of nostalgia for the good old days, because good old days weren't so good. These good new days aren't better. It's a different version of rock. So we got to find the right.
Mm-hmm. What do you think that the younger generations in particular, but I guess the music community more broadly as a whole, how can we be organizing around this? I mean, doing what does that look like today?
I think, I mean, my big thing back when I was, running the artist rights thing, people have to understand two things. They have to understand that the digital companies that claim that are involved in music are not in the music business.
They're not music companies.
They're not in the music business, and they have to understand that this idea, how these companies make money. They make money off of equity. They don't make money off of profit. The practical reality is asking to get the spot and hot take. No, entitled to my hot take. Asking to get a higher Spotify royalty is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
Because what they're going to do is look at how much profit they've made. And that profit is going to be a fraction of how much they are actually worth.
Mm-hmm. And how much is actually being generated by consumers paying for music.
So what you need to look at is what I was saying back then is that artists need to have the same thing that record labels have, which is equity in these companies.
I think that's the best way I've ever heard it, is that they don't make money off of profit. They make money off of equity.
Yeah.
And that's why Spotify has been operating in the red for its entire existence, is because they're not operating off of profit. They're operating off of funneling money through their service to right holders.
Yeah. And until people wrap their head around that, this whole thing is crap. I mean, in the 90s, for every half the people who were watching this born, I had a lawyer who had been the lawyer for Fox Pictures. And in the 90s, he told me that if you look at the accounting of movies, none of them have ever made money. And it's the same thing with Spotify's going to do this. You're going to ask for a bigger royalty, and they're going to tell you they're not making it. They're going to tell you they're not, we're not making money. In the meantime, they're going to have, the major labels took their equity, and the interesting thing to me was, as soon as the labels could sell their equity, they sold it. Which tells you that they don't actually even believe in the business model of Spotify, because they would have held on to it otherwise.
Yes, right.
So, and this is a lot of grandiose talk for a guy who's a working musician, but on a scale of a group of artists need to understand that as a group, changes can be made. I mean, I've actually been, and there are artists who, somebody like a Taylor Swift who's going to stand up and say, look, you need to do things different. I mean, I actually really think she's been really interesting to me on all the moves she's made, because I understand everyone. Like re-recording her masters, all of these things that, at the end of the day, it's like she's taking back her equity, because they're gonna account how they account. This way, at least she actually knows what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think the big thing for everybody who lives in a capitalist society in 2024, 2025 is to really understand how capitalism is actually working and kind of get out of this, don't listen to the words, watch what's actually happening, and watch, think about the fact that none of these companies, I don't know, maybe Amazon started turning a profit 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know. I don't even know. But think about the fact that you have all of these multi-billion-dollar companies who show no profit. And think about what that means for you as a person on the planet who has to go day to day, who doesn't get to live that way. So the question, I think especially for artists, we have to really think about how, because we don't live in a, for better or worse, live in America. We don't live in a socialist country, live in a capitalist country. Understanding fades to that system. And also the flip side of that is understanding that, as I often tell my son, my son is in Norway now, and I've said the Norwegian successful is because the Norwegian oil company is a very well-run company. The fact that you have a business structure doesn't inherently mean that the business structure has to be predatory.
Not at all. And that's a great model of like how you can keep interest of the public in mind when also dealing with a lot of things that people want to come in and just rip the value out of.
Yeah. And the examples that I used to always give were Sunkist Orange is a co-op.
Really?
And Land O'Lakes Butter is also a co-op.
Yeah, from Minnesota.
Yeah. So you can have structures that operate within this system that aren't predatory, but you have to understand the flip side of that is when it's a predatory structure, you have to be willing to walk away. And yes, people, for me, it's if I could, I wouldn't, everything's a case by case basis. So I'm not getting on a high horse about this, but if Spotify's not making any money for you, then you got to figure out what's making money for you. And you have to not listen. Don't listen to what anybody else is telling you as far as, you need to do this. You need to actually look and see, okay, this is what's working for me. And if, you can look I'm on Bandcamp. You can look and see how many streams you got on Bandcamp versus how many streams you got on Spotify. And I'm telling you, my Bandcamp streams might be a lot more money than my Spotify streams do, even though it's drastically lesser. So it becomes a question of how are you going to continue? Not necessarily how is the business going to continue. Now, how is Spotify going to continue? Not how is Meta going to continue? It's a question of how you as an artist are going to continue. Mm-hmm. And that's what artists need to sit down and figure out.
The biggest way of getting value back is by demonstrating to yourself as an artist, like your own value, demonstrating that to the community and sharing that.
Yeah. And I would say, again, going back to the watching this hacker thing, I would say that understand that if you're building a community, a digital community, understand what you're actually, it's not happening. There's a whole bunch of structures already in place that are allowing that community to happen that you have to contend with. And you have to understand that even looking at now this week, it's kind of like Elon Musk is basically going to be part of the U.S. government on the start. Yes, he's outside of the government. But my point is that, I spent years on Twitter. I love it. But for better or worse, it's going to be a quasi-governmental agency as of January 20th. So what does that mean in terms of, okay, so you spent, this time building up this thing and you're going to have to abandon it. So the question is, what things should you build? And I think it's really cool, not that you don't throw the digital tools away. Yeah, but you have to figure out, you have to have, basic things. I always tell people, you have to do all the same things you used to do when I first started. You got to have a mailing list. You actually know them, but you actually have to know who these people are and how to get in touch with them for real, not just they're not just your social media friends. You have to have your real information. You have to be able to contact these people in real life, and you have to get it together with them in real life. It can't just be, if you got somebody who, Estonia, okay, you have to communicate with them virtually, but you still have to figure out how to maintain a real life connection with these people.
It's like there's a social media follow is not equivalent to an actual fan-artist relationship.
Yeah. I mean, you know, like we used to say, you can't pay your rent with likes. So,
or with streams for that matter.
No. So it becomes but then, you know, so it really becomes a question of, I think people have to really do the thing that everybody's doing, but they have to do it intelligently. You have to really question what everything, you know. When somebody tells you a piece of advice, who is that piece of advice for? Who's benefiting from that? If somebody tells you, okay, you need to have, I'll give you an example on it, you know, I stopped posting on Twitter, I don't know, a year ago probably, but I still check in 2 or 3 times a week to see I'm still kind of lurking. And the last time I lurked, I saw a post from this guy who's kind of like a Silicon Valley kind of guru guy, talking about the fact that people were going to regret leaving Twitter X, whatever you want to call it, because of the network effects. And my response to that is, whose problem is that? I mean, most people have a network. What was the thing? 125 people is your network. You don't need any social media to communicate with your network of 125 people. If you're looking for a bigger network, if you're in a position where your network is bigger, these things are commodities. That's what happened. Okay, let me go back. That's what happened with Spotify. I'm going to derail this. And one of the other things, one of the talking points I always had was hip hop wouldn't be able to start today. Yeah. Another big talking point is there's no such thing as an average fan. You know, you look at it, people look at their digital business, they're trying to figure out how they can grow this thing and how they can put a number around it. So they say, okay, let's take X amount of people and multiply, what's the multiple? And they pull a number and they say, okay, that's our average number. That has nothing to do with how music works. There's no such thing as an average fan. There's people who are into you and there are people who are not. And the people who are into you are way into you. So whether the thing is 0 or the thing is, what are they paying for Taylor Swift? $250? Yeah. Whether it's 0 or $250, they're still going to show up. Yeah. Because then the price is not what's determining what they're. In the same way, if you're a fan of Metallica, just pulling the name out, you don't care who else is on Spotify. It's like you don't care that Taylor Swift is on Spotify. You care that Metallica is on Spotify. So this whole idea that works for the business people, it doesn't work for artists. You got to think about, you know, if you're Metallica, you don't, you know, if they left Spotify tomorrow, I mean, they might lose money, but they might not. Mm-hmm. You know, because they're but if they lost track of their fans, yeah, if they don't already have that information, they're fucked. Excuse me. So the question is, it's the same as it was, you know, when it's about having the info about who your fans are and being able to communicate them and understanding what they want. You know, they might, you know, a lot of people throw out a lot of music because they want to get these numbers up. Maybe your fans don't want a lot of music. Maybe they only want to get together, you know. Maybe your fans want to see you play and they want you to, you know, maybe you need to figure out like what William Parker did in New York and set up a festival where everybody can come see you. So I think my point being is that whatever wisdom is coming from people, it has to be coming. Look at the wisdom coming from the people who are doing what you want to do, not the people who's doing something else that has nothing to do with what you want to do. That would be the shortest way. Don't listen to the wisdom of people whose businesses are designed on scale.
Yeah.
If you're an artist.
Yeah.
Because some people are going to scale. Like I used to say, the New York Philharmonic shouldn't be competing with Justin Bieber or whatever, or they shouldn't be competing that stuff, but they shouldn't be competing with Dua Lipa now, or Chappell Roll. They're never going to get those kind of streaming numbers. So why? But it doesn't mean, in their way, they're just as valuable.
Yeah.
But when you funnel it through the digital funnel, they're much less valuable. So you got to figure out how to keep yourself out. I mean, and that really actually starts with thinking about yourself as valuable. It starts with thinking of as your creativity is valuable, and that's something that I think that's a cultural issue. That's something that has to happen in school or happen at home where people are thinking, "Oh, I like that. Put the drawing on the wall. Yeah, it's valuable." It's not just like, okay, now I put it up here. And yeah, you want everybody to see it. But if you've only got, if the 50 people that are going to see it are the 50 people in your class, then hang it on the wall in your class and don't put it up. That makes it more valuable. But, I mean, I hopefully there was a takeaway in that, which
absolutely. Well, I just want to say thank you for sharing all of this today. I think there's a lot of really good lessons for artists and just as people, as humans to learn. Just to wrap things up, like what's exciting for you on the horizon in terms of musical projects or just life?
Well, I mean, life is life. Every day is exciting. Music, the band I'm in, Harriet Tubman, we've just finished a record. We worked with the great singer, keyboard player, record producer, Georgia Ann Muldrow out of Los Angeles. We have a record with her that I'm really excited about.
When does that come out?
We're shopping it right now, so hopefully someone will pick it up soon. I can't give a date for that.
Sure.
Me personally, the main thing I've been working on for the past couple of years, and it's almost there, is my book, which is called The Science of Black Music, and I'm looking at a early 26 release for that on Basic Books. So that's the thing I'm actually really
How long have you been working on that?
Couple of years now.
Nice.
Couple of years now. One of the two big buckets are the geometry of rhythm and Black music in the West as an evolutionary process, talking particularly about the effect of environment on evolution and stuff like that. So, and I kind of hang it on my life story and how I kind of figured out how to do all the different stuff I know how to do. So it's a guide for a practitioner.
Are you going to record with Bill Frisell anytime?
Hopefully, I don't know if I'm going to do anything new. Hopefully, the Power Tools record is going to get David Reston, who produced it, is in the process of getting the rights for the record back now. Remaster it and put out a couple of alternative takes and stuff like that. Hopefully, that will happen within the next year.
It's exciting.
Yeah. And I do something with Bill. Might not depends. It depends on his schedule. He's a busy guy.
Both are.
Yeah. But I'm working on that, and I have a couple of other projects that I have to work on. I have a record. I have a whole bunch of productions that I have. Working with a bunch of producers in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Then I'm going to do a record, kind of like an electronic record of that. I have a long-time project with the theoretical physicist named Stefan Alexander.
Music project?
What?
A music project?
A music project. And him and I we had a meeting a few months ago talking about the kind of theoretical backdrop of what the music's going to be, and then we're going to get together the next couple of months and actually write the music. Cool. And that's going to be a composer's album. We're not going to play on that album. We're going to hire a band, and do that.
Yeah.
So that's really sit down and write. So those, and I have another. So there's three things. I have that, and I have a third record of kind of like instrumentally jazz, modern electric jazz stuff that's sitting that's also going to come out.
Cool.
So there's stuff in there. But the main thing is, like I said, I'm almost at the end of the road of the book. And once the book is done, which will be in the next couple of weeks, then I'm going to jump right back into music.
Nice. That's congrats on finishing the book. That's a long process.
Yeah, it is. And, it's been great, and, it's, hopefully people will enjoy it when it hits.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for the time, Melvin. It's great to chat.
Thank you.